After 8 years of caring for my bedridden mother-in-law, I overheard her call me a mere servant, so I pulled out and did the unthinkable. Dear viewers, please join me to the end as I narrate my story, but before then, please kindly hit the subscribe button to support me. Your support means the world to me. Thank you. Now to the main story. My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm 36 years old, married to a wonderful man named Daniel. Or at least he was wonderful once. We live in a quiet suburban town in Connecticut, the kind where neighbors wave politely but mind their business. Our home sits on a cul-de-sac lined with trimmed hedges and too many Labradors. For the past 8 years my life has revolved around one thing, caring for my bedridden mother-in-law, Margaret Whitmore. When Margaret had her second stroke, Daniel was drowning in work as a senior project manager at a tech firm. He traveled a lot, Boston one week, Seattle the next. There was no one else. Daniel is her only child, and Margaret had long since outlived her siblings. We couldn't afford a full-time nurse back then, and I had just left my teaching job to focus on starting our family. That never happened. I still remember the day we brought her home from the hospital. She was frail, angry, and utterly helpless. A shell of the no-nonsense, pearl-wearing woman who once served roast lamb with minted peas at every family dinner. She refused help from strangers, which left just me. I became the nurse, cook, housekeeper, and emotional punching bag. My days started at 5:30 a.m. I'd prepare her medication, feed her pureed breakfast through a straw, then bathe her stiff, uncooperative body. Changing adult diapers wasn't something I ever imagined I'd do, especially not for someone who once scolded me for serving overcooked pasta. She couldn't speak clearly anymore, but her eyes said enough, always judging, always watchful. Sometimes she would squeeze my hand gently, and I'd hold on to that gesture as proof I was doing something right. Other days, she'd groan in frustration, spitting out food or pushing away the spoon with what little strength she had. I never reacted. I just wiped her mouth and kept going. I stopped seeing my friends. I stopped going to church. I didn't even notice when my jeans started hanging off my hips. My hair, once a curly chestnut crown, lived in a permanent bun. Became invisible. Except to Margaret. Neighbors admired me. "You're a saint, Claire," they'd say when I wheeled her out on the porch to get some air. Even Daniel would sometimes stroke my back and whisper, "I don't know how you do it." And Margaret, she'd look up from her blanket-covered legs and smile faintly. "You're good to me, Claire," she'd say on her better days, her voice a low slur. Those words carried me. Sometimes I cried in the laundry room, folding stained sheets. But I told myself it was worth it. I believed that somewhere deep down Margaret loved me. Maybe not with flowers and hugs, but in her own way. When she clutched my hand during a thunderstorm, or when her eyes softened while I brushed her thinning gray hair, I held on to those tiny moments. Daniel and I began to drift apart. He loved me, I knew, but the intimacy had long faded. Our conversations became logistical check-ins. Grocery lists, doctor appointments, Margaret's bowel movements. We rarely went out. I started feeling like more of a caretaker than a wife. But I never blamed him. Had chosen this. I told myself I was doing God's work. Some evenings, after tucking Margaret in, I'd sit by her bedside, reading aloud from her favorite novels. Jane Austen mostly. Sense and Sensibility. Emma. Her eyes would flutter closed, and for a few minutes, I imagined we were close. A real mother and daughter. When her arthritis worsened, I learned how to massage her joints. When her skin grew sores, I cleaned them gently, apologizing each time she winced. I kept the house spotless. I cooked her bland meals with love, even though she barely ate. I celebrated her birthday, complete with a pink frosted cupcake and a candle she couldn't blow out. I gave up so much, my career, my body, my peace, but I told myself it was worth it. That love, even unspoken, mattered. That Margaret saw me not just as a caregiver, but as family. She never once asked about my dreams. About the baby I miscarried quietly one autumn, after collapsing from exhaustion. Daniel didn't even know. I told myself that once she got better or passed on, I'd rebuild. I held on for 8 years. 8 long years of folding towels in silence. Of serving meals I didn't eat. Of sacrificing every piece of who I was for a woman who rarely said thank you, but sometimes looked at me with something that resembled affection. That was enough. Until the day I learned what she really thought of me. It was a Wednesday. Not that days meant much to me anymore. They all blurred into one long caregiving loop. I had just finished feeding Margaret her usual soft oatmeal with mashed bananas, and had left her watching a rerun of Murder, She Wrote in the living room. The TV volume was low, and the windows were open to let in the breeze. I remember I had gone to the laundry room to fetch clean sheets when I heard the front door open and then close gently. We weren't expecting anyone. I moved quietly down the hallway, balancing folded towels in my arms. As I got closer to the living room, I recognized the voice. It was Cynthia, Margaret's cousin from Vermont. She visited once every 6 months, always dressed in layers and reeking of lavender hand cream. She never offered to help, never asked about me. Just came, sipped tea, made snide remarks about modern marriages, and left. I wasn't in the mood for small talk, so I waited just by the kitchen entrance, out of sight. "Cynthia," Margaret's voice came, raspy but unusually clear. "You know Claire? That girl's just a glorified servant." My chest froze. Cynthia chuckled. "She's still looking after you. Bless her heart." Margaret continued. "Oh, she acts like Mother Teresa, fussing over me like she's some martyr. But really, she's doing what any good housemaid should do. I never asked her to give up her life. That was her choice." My arms trembled under the weight of the towels. I slowly lowered them onto the countertop. My heart began to thump so loudly I thought they'd hear it. "She just wants to look good," Margaret went on. "Always hovering like she's waiting for a medal. Please. A real daughter would have done the same." I couldn't move. Years. 8 years of sponge baths, bruised knuckles and sleepless nights. 8 years of putting her first. 8 years of thinking I was building something, trust, maybe even love. To her I was just furniture. Useful. Replaceable. I felt my throat tighten, tears rushing to the surface, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I inhaled quietly, straightened my shoulders, and walked away without making a sound. I went into the laundry room and shut the door softly behind me. The towels sat untouched on the counter. I sat on the floor, knees drawn to my chest, and let the silence surround me. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just stared at the dryer door, trying to process the punch I'd just received. All those times she smiled faintly at me, were they fake? All those whispered thank yous on better days, were they just part of the performance? Later that night, I served her dinner without a word. Mashed carrots, boiled chicken, soft bread. I placed the tray gently on her lap, helped her sit up, and wiped the corners of her mouth when she drooled. She didn't mention her visitor or the conversation. Neither did I. But something inside me had shifted. I watched her chew slowly, lips puckered, head nodding slightly at the taste. And all I could think was, "You don't deserve me." That night, Daniel came home late again. He kissed me on the forehead and mumbled something about a delay on the Boston project. I nodded and went back to brushing Margaret's hair. He didn't notice the hollowness in my eyes. He didn't see the volcano building beneath my skin. Over the next few days I found myself operating on autopilot. Wake, bathe, feed, clean, repeat. But now I was numb. Her presence no longer stirred anything warm in me. I began to replay her words over and over like a broken record. She's just a glorified servant. I had given her my youth. I had buried my identity beneath hers. And in return she gave me labels. I didn't confront her. That would have given her power. I let her enjoy her meals and her comfort and her fresh clothes, all while I planned my quiet exit. The next week, I started looking up home care agencies online during the short breaks I could snatch. I compared costs, availability, reviews. I didn't tell Daniel. Not yet. I wanted to reclaim my life in silence, the way I had lost it. I contacted a caregiver named Jolene. Mid-40s, certified, kind smile in her profile picture. We set up a home visit. During the interview, Margaret asked, "Why do we need her?" Smiled. "Just some extra help in case I need to run errands." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Maybe she thought I'd continue groveling for her approval. The next day I took a long walk to the park, alone, for the first time in years. I watched children on swings, couples sipping iced coffee, joggers with earbuds. It felt like watching a world I didn't belong to anymore. But I wanted back in. I sat on a bench and wrote a list of the things I used to love. Books, dancing, traveling, teaching, laughing. Then I folded the paper and placed it in my purse. That night I watched Margaret sleep and whispered, "You won't break me." But in truth she already had. From that day forward, I stopped doing anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. I still gave Margaret her morning pills and made sure she didn't starve. I still helped her in and out of the wheelchair, cleaned her up, changed her bedding. But all the little extras, the warmth, the comfort, the tender smiles, they vanished. Gone were the story readings and soft music in the evenings. I no longer rubbed her knees when the arthritis flared. No more back rubs or fresh flowers on her windowsill. I had become exactly what she called me. Functional, mechanical, silent. Daniel noticed first. "Claire," he said one night while we were brushing our teeth, "you've been distant lately. Is everything okay?" I looked at him through the mirror. He seemed genuinely concerned, but also clueless. I wanted to say, "Ask your mother. Ask her what she thinks I am." But instead I just nodded. "I'm fine. Just tired." He kissed my shoulder and turned off the light. Margaret didn't say anything either. Not at first. But I noticed her glancing at me longer, as though searching for the softness she once took for granted. One morning, she called out after I dropped her cereal bowl on the tray without a word. "Claire." I stopped, turned slowly. "Yes." She hesitated. "You didn't say good morning." I stared at her blankly, then forced a thin smile. "Good morning." She gave me a puzzled look. That was the beginning of her suspicion. When Jolene, the caregiver I had interviewed, came by for a second visit, I let her shadow me. She was gentle and efficient. Margaret asked again why we needed her. I told her, "I'm planning to go back to work part-time. I'll need someone here during the day." Margaret's eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. She must have thought I'd cave in eventually, that I couldn't possibly survive without being needed. But I was already gone. Mentally, emotionally. I enrolled in a local adult learning course. Just a few hours a week. Interior design. Something I'd always been curious about but never pursued. I told Daniel I needed something for myself. He nodded, a little surprised but supportive. It felt strange sitting in a classroom again, surrounded by strangers who didn't know me as the caregiver. For the first time in years, I introduced myself simply as Claire. No hyphens, no roles attached. I began to dress differently too. Nothing flashy. Just color. Color I hadn't worn in years. A soft blue blouse. A green scarf. Lip balm. Tiny steps toward reclaiming the woman I used to be. The house no longer smelled like disinfectant all the time. I opened windows, lit candles, bought myself a bouquet of peonies. Margaret asked where they came from. I said, "They're mine." Jolene took over the day shifts 2 times a week. On those days I took long walks, met with a classmate for coffee, or simply sat by the river downtown, listening to life buzz around me. Margaret grew colder in response. She didn't say much, but I could tell she hated that I was pulling away. That I no longer hovered like a moth to her flame. She asked fewer questions. I answered with fewer words. One evening while helping her into bed she asked, "Do you still care?" I paused, tucking the sheets under her sides. "I care enough to make sure you're safe." She didn't respond, just stared at the ceiling. Daniel still didn't know what had really happened. We barely had time to talk properly. His job was swallowing him whole. I thought about telling him the truth, but a part of me wanted him to see it himself, to notice how years of giving had slowly emptied me out. The guilt never came. I expected to feel it when I stopped doting on her, when I said no instead of yes. But all I felt was relief. One morning, Jolene arrived early and found me in the garden, kneeling by the rose bushes. She smiled and said, "You look rested." I laughed softly. I think I'm starting to breathe again. That afternoon, while sorting out bills, I found a letter I'd written to myself 6 years ago. It was folded and yellowing in the back of my desk drawer. The handwriting was rushed, desperate. "Dear Claire, don't lose yourself. Please don't forget who you are." I read it 3 times, then pressed it to my chest. Tears welled up, not of sadness, but of quiet grief for the woman who wrote it. She had begged to be seen, and now finally she was being heard by me. That evening, Margaret rang her bell after dinner. I walked in calmly. "Yes." Her voice was quieter than usual. "I know I'm not easy." I didn't reply. "I appreciate what you do, even if I don't always say it." I stood there, arms folded, unsure whether to believe her or not. The woman who once compared me to a servant was now fishing for redemption. But I didn't offer her any comfort. Not yet. "I'll see you in the morning," I said softly and turned off the light. I left the room with a strange sense of peace. I wasn't angry anymore, just detached, and maybe that was worse for her. But for me it was healing. The day it happened started like any other. I was in the middle of sketching a mood board for one of our class assignments, a small cottage living room reimagined in warm earth tones, when my phone buzzed. It was Jolene. "Claire," she said, her voice edged with stress. "I think Margaret fell." My stomach dropped, but I didn't panic. "Is she okay?" "She's on the floor near the bathroom," she said. "She's conscious but embarrassed. Refused my help." I was home within 15 minutes. Margaret lay there in a twisted mess of her robe and blankets, one slipper on, hair disheveled, cheeks flushed with shame. Jolene stood a few feet away, respecting the boundaries Margaret always insisted on. I looked down at her, this once proud woman now groaning softly, her face contorted between pain and pride. She looked up and saw me. For a brief second, her eyes flashed with something I hadn't seen before, fear. I crouched beside her. "Margaret," I said calmly. "Are you hurt?" She gritted her teeth. "No, just help me up." I didn't move. Instead I stood. I straightened the hem of my sweater, crossed my arms, and looked her square in the face. "You know," I said slowly, "this would be the perfect time for a servant to jump in." Her eyes widened. I stepped back. "Unfortunately," I continued, my voice ice, "you told someone I'm just a servant, a glorified maid. And you know what, Margaret? Servants don't run this household. I do." Silence. Even Jolene froze behind me. I turned to her. "Jolene, call the ambulance. I want her checked out." "Of course," she whispered. Margaret opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes welled with tears. Genuine or not, I no longer knew. While we waited for the paramedics, I sat in the armchair across the room and watched her, unmoved. Jolene knelt beside her, holding her hand gently. Margaret was transported to the hospital. Nothing broken, thank God, just a bruised hip and an even more bruised ego. I didn't ride along. I stayed home, cleaned up the mess, and opened all the windows. That night I called Daniel. He was in a hotel in DC on another work trip. "Hey babe," he said, voice tired. "Everything all right?" "No," I replied. "Margaret fell today." Jolene found her on the floor. "What? Is she okay?" he asked, suddenly alert. "She's fine. No breaks. But I'm not doing this anymore, Daniel." Silence. I let it hang. I needed him to hear the weight of it. "I've done everything. For 8 years. I've given her my body, my time, my youth. And a few weeks ago, I overheard her tell Cynthia I was just her servant. That everything I've done was for show. That I'm replaceable. I heard him exhale, slow and heavy. I didn't want to tell you right away because I wasn't sure how I'd react. But now I know. I'm done. Claire, he started. I've already arranged for Jolene to go full-time. I'll coordinate her hours, but I won't be the one wiping down bathroom floors at 2 a.m. anymore. I won't sacrifice what's left of myself. He was quiet for a long moment. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He finally said, his voice low. Because you weren't here, Daniel. Not really. You were gone long before she said those words. I just didn't realize how gone I was too. I heard a sniff, then the rustle of hotel sheets. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't respond. I'll fly home tomorrow. We'll figure this out. Okay, I said. But even then, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be figured out anymore. I had started peeling back the layers of sacrifice, and underneath, I found a woman who had been quiet for too long. Margaret returned home 2 days later. She didn't say much to me. She let Jolene handle everything. Meals, bathing, mobility. She asked for me once or twice, but I didn't come. Daniel arrived the next evening. He held me longer than usual, and when he let go, his eyes were filled with something between guilt and grief. I didn't know how hard it was, he said. You didn't want to, I replied gently. We slept in the same bed that night for the first time in weeks. And though our backs faced each other, there was a silent understanding that something had broken, but something else might begin to grow. The next morning, Margaret called out while Jolene was tending to her. Claire! I appeared at the door, arms crossed. She swallowed. Thank you for everything you did. Even if I never said it right. I nodded once. I didn't do it for your thanks. She blinked back tears. I know. And I walked away. Not in anger, but in freedom. Daniel kept his promise. He cut back on work travel and started helping Jolene with Margaret's care. At first, it was awkward. He fumbled with the wheelchair, avoided eye contact during sponge baths, and overcompensated with medical charts he didn't understand. But I appreciated the effort. He was trying. Maybe for the first time in a long time. We began having real conversations again. Not about Margaret but about us. About how the last 8 years had stretched us thin, quietly stealing our joy while we played the roles we thought we were supposed to. Husband, wife, dutiful son, selfless daughter-in-law. One Saturday morning we walked around the neighborhood just like we used to. Coffee cups in hand, breeze in our faces, and no agenda except moving forward. You were right to pull back, he said after a long silence. I let you carry too much for too long. He nodded. I let myself carry it too. I just didn't know how to stop. He reached for my hand. Let him. Margaret had changed too. Not dramatically but noticeably. She no longer rang her bell a dozen times a day. She no longer demanded honey in her tea or insisted on specific bath towels. Jolene said she'd even asked about my classes. One evening after I came home from a workshop, I found a note on the kitchen counter. A folded piece of yellow notepad paper with just a few words in shaky handwriting. Claire, I was wrong. Thank you for not letting that be the end of me. I didn't know if she meant the fall or our relationship. Maybe both. I didn't reply. I just placed it in the same drawer where I'd kept that old letter to myself, the one begging me not to disappear. Weeks turned into months. I completed my course and landed a part-time job at a local home interior studio. Small projects at first, color consultations, window treatment plans, but it felt like breathing after holding my breath for years. I made new friends, real ones, women who didn't know me as the caretaker, but as Claire, the woman who loved terracotta walls and vintage lamps and never turned down lemon cake. I started dancing again. Not in public, not yet. But at home when no one was watching. In socks. In pajamas. Spinning slowly to Ella Fitzgerald in the living room. I caught Daniel smiling once, watching from the hallway. He didn't interrupt. He just watched like someone remembering something they thought they lost. Margaret's health stabilized under Jolene's care. They had found a rhythm. Some days were harder than others, but for the most part she had softened. Or maybe I had stopped carrying her weight on my shoulders. We existed in the same house, but no longer in the same emotional tangle. She stayed in her part of the world, and I reclaimed mine. One morning while I was packing my bag for work, Margaret called out, "Claire!" I stepped into her room. She looked at me, eyes more tired than usual but clear, present. I know I can't undo what I said. I didn't speak. But I want you to know I see it now. Everything you gave. I gave a small nod. I'm sorry I didn't say it when it mattered most. It still matters, I said softly. She blinked rapidly, and for the first time, I saw her not as a burden or a tyrant, but as a woman who was once strong and proud and maybe a little scared of being forgotten. I walked over, adjusted her blanket, and placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You're safe, Margaret. That's enough." She closed her eyes. That night Daniel and I watched a film on the couch. Halfway through he turned to me and said, "You're different. Lighter." Smiled. I feel like myself again. Later as I lay in bed, I thought about all the women like me. Women who love deeply, give endlessly, and forget themselves in the process. Women who are told their value is in how much they sacrifice. Here's the truth. Love is not servitude. And silence is not sainthood. I gave her 8 years of my life. And in return I got insulted. But walking away was the best thing I ever did. 'Cause it led me back to myself. Certainly. Here's a reflective advice from the narrator followed by a compelling outro you can use for your YouTube audience. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Love should never cost you yourself. Caring for others is noble. But losing your identity in the process isn't. Don't wait 8 years like I did to realize that being appreciated is not selfish. It's necessary. Listen to the quiet voice inside you. The one that says, "I matter too." 'Cause you do. Your dreams, your joy, your peace, they're not luxuries. They're your rights. And boundaries. They're not acts of rebellion. They're acts of self-respect. So here's my advice. Serve with love, but don't forget to serve yourself too. And if someone calls you just a servant after everything you've done, walk away with your head high. That says more about them than it ever will about you. Thank you for listening to my story. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been taken for granted after doing so much for someone? What would you have done if you were in Claire's shoes? Do you think walking away was too extreme, or long overdue? Drop your answers in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful life stories that speak straight to the heart.